Welcome to Live with Tricia, where we are in part two of an amazing conversation with Aaron Searles. Aaron is the unemployed alcoholic, and we have been having an amazing talk about his journey from being an introverted young man and pastor's son and struggling into getting married early in life, having this addiction to alcohol start defining his life. So we're going to pick up where we left off. Let's talk about it today with Aaron Searles on Live with Tricia.
Welcome to Season 2, Laugh Your Past Off. Live with Tricia is an innovative platform that's been recorded before a live online studio audience. As a faith-based award-winning actor, director, author, and entrepreneur, Tricia Harmon inspires, listens, and joins the larger discussion. Get ready to engage for the next 30-ish minutes in innovative and authentic conversation with award-winning and renowned comedians from around the country, offering inspirational perspective and purpose as together we learn how to laugh our past off.
Welcome back, Aaron. It is really good to keep this conversation going. So we took a little coffee break, a little refill, and we're ready to get right back into this conversation. But for those who are just joining us and haven't really got the first part, give us just a little snippet of what your life was like prior to going into recovery and what led to that, and then we'll jump right into the meat and potatoes.
Boy, it was interesting hearing your intro and hearing my 44-year life condensed down into 45 seconds. So that was neat. But if I was going to elaborate on that a little bit, I'd say, yeah, probably. The biggest thing that defines me as the unemployed alcoholic is, battling through alcoholism, going through a season of unemployment, and then through that kind of painful process, finding comedy and starting to do comedy with the hope of helping people laugh while highlighting recovery and faith. And this has been a great adventure. I know we got into a lot of pretty deep stuff in the last episode, and we had to stop because you asked me a question that deserves a way deeper answer than the few minutes that we had allocated for it. So what was that question again, Tricia?
Nice segue, Aaron. Well, we were talking about how, the dealing with the alcoholism looked like and what led to that. And you kind of got to the bottom of the barrel. We talked about that. But then we started talking about how did your recovery now start affecting your mental health, and what did you discover about yourself in the process of your recovering?
Oh boy, that's a deep one. And it's, as much stigma that there is around recovery, there's at least as much, if not more, around mental health challenges. And I was about a year and a half into the recovery process. I had over a year and a half of sobriety. I had started down this adventure of doing comedy, which was very exciting and cool and fun and all that. But I still found that these huge cycles of deep depression and debilitating anxiety, I was still experiencing those. I had kind of always blamed that on the alcohol, but even after a year and a half of sobriety, I was still experiencing those things. And there's a family history of mental health struggles in my family. My dad, who I mentioned the last episode, we lost him about a year ago, and he had a long battle with bipolar disorder, and that added some pretty intense challenges for him. One of my sisters battles mental health struggles, and it's a common thread through my family. But even so, I didn't really think that the things that I was dealing with could be mental health related, and so I'd kind of pushed that off and avoided that. Finally, I got to the point where I went to Pine Rest here in Grand Rapids and had an appointment with a psychiatrist, and we sat down and started chatting. I was doing a pretty good job managing the conversation.
It's like anger management.
Yeah. It was
kind of an oxymoron.
It was a practice in deflection for sure. And it was almost like I was taking a test that I wanted to pass and prove that I was okay. But fortunately, the doctor that I was meeting with is well trained, and he managed to break through some of that shell. And he asked me a question that really changed my life. He said, if you were to step out into the road and be hit by a bus tomorrow, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It took me quite a while to even be able to answer that. I sat there in silence for about 5 minutes. And when I finally did muster up the ability to answer, I said, good. The first thing that comes to mind when I picture being hit and killed by a bus is good.
Wow.
I was experiencing passive suicidal ideation, which unfortunately suicidal thoughts are an incredibly common thing nowadays. We lose many, many wonderful people to death by suicide every year. The stats, I'm not going to quote them, but they're staggering. It's tragic.
Yeah.
And I was experiencing some of that. He diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and then later diagnosed me with bipolar type 2. Some of the things that I was dealing with, that I was self-medicating through alcohol, were mental health struggles.
And the alcohol only exacerbates everything. It makes it even worse because of that.
It makes it worse long term, but I mean, symptomatically speaking, yeah, if symptomatically I was very much using it as a way to minimize symptoms. And it's effective in that.
If you pass out, you're not you're not making any more stupid choices, right?
And it's a very common treatment. There's a lot of people that are struggling with anxiety or depression that are treating that with alcohol. It's very common.
And I'm just going to interrupt you here too, because yes, we are talking about alcoholism, but again, just like in part one, we also are recognizing that addiction is addiction in any form, whether it is drugs and opioids and prescription medicine or pornography or sexual, habits and addictions or gambling. I mean, you can name any addiction that's on the list. And this is across the board. We medicate to cover up the pain, the wound, whether it's broken promises, whether it's violation, whether it's abuse, whether it's just place and point in our lives where we reject ourselves or reject others and don't want to forgive. And there's really a root, wouldn't you say, Aaron? There's a root of bitterness that springs up as a result of the hurt and the pain. And it just, when we fill it with everything else, we really are fertilizing the pain and the woundedness even more.
Yeah, there's a root of bitterness. There's avoidance. there's a lot of self-defense mechanisms that come into play. But
so how long were you in treatment?
We looked at it, and we looked at a couple of different medications to help that. One of the things that was going on, or at least the speculation on one of the things that was going on, is there's a chemical called serotonin in all of our brains. Some brains absorb serotonin at a faster rate than other brains. Well, what happens in your brain when levels of serotonin go down very quickly is you get depressed. It's a math equation. It's a science problem. There's a medication or a type of medications that's called selective serotonin reabsorption inhibitors, or SSRIs. I started taking one of those, and that changed my life. Suddenly, this chemical in my brain that would get reabsorbed and cause depression, it would stay at a normal rate. That helped a lot. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all fix. That was one of the things. Another one of the things was therapy. We went through cognitive behavior therapy, and we started basically having therapy sessions and talking through some things. We'd look at scenarios and how I would react in those scenarios and what my thought patterns were and those things, and talk through and really dig into why and how and what are other alternatives. It was incredibly valuable. And in therapy, there's, therapy can be a lifelong thing if people find that that's most beneficial, but it also can be have a start and an end to it. Yeah. And we went through about 12 sessions of pretty intensive therapy. And then we dropped that down to only connecting about once every 3 months. And then now at my last meeting with my therapist, my psychiatrist, we determined that we were going to conclude our scheduled meetings. Medication would be managed by my primary care physician, and I was ready to move on. So that course of treatment had a beginning and an end. It was very, very impactful and wonderful. It didn't take the place of a recovery support group. It didn't take the place of having mentors in my life. It didn't take the place of having loving relationships, but it very much was impactful in my quality of life and the quality of life for the people around me improving greatly.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is that there was a course without an expected end, but then you continually evaluated and adjusted and saw an end and said, this is not needed. And I too, I've had 11 pregnancies and 4 miscarriages. So I have 7 character builders here on earth and 4 in glory waiting to greet me. But I had 1 miscarry early on. I was a brand new Christian, I was a brand new wife. We moved to Grand Rapids from Higgins Lake, which is, beautiful Higgins Lake. And I come to the city and, was not prepared. And now I'm this new believer, which really just means that I traded in my religion for a relationship that was personal and active and live. But I had this miscarry, and this miscarry threw my hormones into such a whirlwind that I became not just depressed. It was like a postpartum depression, but I didn't recognize it. It just was like no will, and everything was going awry in my life. And I too started seeing psychiatrist who worked at Pine Rest. He attended our church. And for me personally, I needed to get on a medication that just regulated my hormones, kind of like what you were talking about. And so I was able to sleep, and I was able to just kind of line things up. And for me, I think it was 18 months of that until we again decided. But here's the one thing that for me made all the difference. And I'm so thankful that God led me to this doctor who actually was rooted in the Word of God, because that was what happened for me. It was like up until that point, I was so new. I started just I called it my little gospel garbage truck. I would watch and observe. Oh, that's what a Christian looks like. Oh, that's what Christians wear. Oh, that's what Christians how they talk. Oh, that's not where Christians go, that kind of thing. And I would assimilate it. And so my faith was built on everybody else. I was just this observer and just started packing it on and, acting like everybody else in this new Christian world. And what happened for me was that God just ripped all that sand out. It talks about the wise man builds his house upon the rock. And up until that point, my life was being built upon sand that was sinking fast. It was a way for me to get rooted in the Word of God, understand who God is and what He desired from me, for me to take care of past issues. I had offended a lot of people before I came to Christ. And so lining up and getting rid of the guilt, getting rid of the shame, getting rid of the condemnation, going back and apologizing and seeking and extending. And, I'll talk about that second book that I wrote about no more victim mentality, the 5-fold principles of biblical forgiveness. That is what I wrote as a result of what I went through. But it took medication. It took something to help me get even keeled so that I could see things from a perspective outside of my own head. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And again, talking about medication for mental health struggles, that in and of itself has a huge stigma. And it really, in my opinion, it shouldn't.
I love where you're going because, we do have this opioid addiction now. We've got, it's almost like the cure has become the addiction. And so, yes, there is even something that could lead into another misuse and addiction. So I think what I hear you saying is get to the source, and the source is the root of it rather than just replacing it. And I love this analogy that I heard somebody say, it's not as important of what you turn from, but who you turn to. We turn from one thing or another all the time, and we can just replace it with something else. So if we're going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and we're not receiving the help that we really need, we can just replace it with something else and then create another cycle, another crazy round on that merry-go-round.
Yeah, it's important not to, it's important to both equalize things like you had mentioned, and at the same time dig to root cause of where our hurts are coming from and where the ultimate source of healing is. That's super important. But that piece of seeking medical attention, there's a stigma around that. One of the first times that I shared the fact that I had been diagnosed with bipolar type 2, a Christian came up to me afterwards and he said, if you were a real Christian, you would just bind bipolar and send it to hell, and you would not have to seek medical attention for it. And I'm just going to bite my tongue right now on what my internal response to that was. But unfortunately, that opinion is really common. That opinion of any mental health struggle that you're experiencing means you're not a good Christian.
Well, I'm not going to bite my tongue because I was that person. I was in that sector of believers who thought you don't have enough faith to deal with this. And it is a matter of praying. And, I've been well trained in spiritual warfare. So that became the all end to everything somebody was dealing with. So unfortunately, I just want to be real here and say, I was one of those people who thought this is a spiritual issue. This is something that you need to handle in prayer and fasting and, binding the enemy and all of those things. And so it can cause tremendous damage in relationships, which are so crucial to begin with, but then it causes even more condemnation and shame and inadequacy in a person because it isn't the only thing that needs to happen. And I'm so thankful that God has brought me to a point in my spiritual walk where now we can have this conversation and I can not just validate you, but affirm that it's true, that yes, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And He is the answer. And there is power in the Word of God, but He also raises up professionals. He also raises up other things that come alongside, just like Aaron needed to help Moses keep his hands up. We need people in our lives that God raises up to help us become what we need to, even when we're weary and feeble in our knees to stand.
And just for clarification there, when you say Aaron helping Moses, that wasn't me. That was another guy named Aaron.
Oh, Aaron, you weren't there.
yeah, he was named after me. No.
So speaking of holding up hands, holding up holy hands, and you, who in your life came alongside and started holding your hands up? So who were your Aarons, Aaron?
There's a lot of people that I could talk about, but let's turn it back to comedy since that's the theme of this. And this has been a pretty deep conversation for a podcast about laughing your past off. So, and that's good. But so if I think about the people who have influenced me and mentored me in comedy, there's two people that come to mind. The first one is Michael Jr. He's a phenomenal Christian comedian. After I had resigned from my job and thrown myself into recovery and was going through this period of unemployment, I heard him speak at the Global Leadership Summit. That's a big leadership seminar put on by the Global Leadership Network. And he was speaking and he talked about doing comedy with a purpose. that just planted a seed.
What a concept.
Yeah. It planted a seed in my head. At that point, no part of me thought, oh, I'm going to do that. But it just planted a seed that, hey, you can do comedy with a purpose. You can do comedy that's not degrading and taking away. You can do comedy that's adding and helping.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me, and it just kind of stuck with me. Well, then sometime over the course of the next year, I decided I was going to do comedy, and I was coming up on my first time ever doing comedy, which was with Laugh Fest. It was at Dr. Grin's, the biggest comedy club in Grand Rapids and West Michigan, really. I was coming up on that show, and Michael Jr. happened to be in town to do a show. And a friend of mine called me and said, hey, would you mind picking up Michael Jr. from the hotel and driving him to the venue tonight? And
yes.
Yeah. And I said, absolutely. This guy, influenced me. So I picked him up and we drove to the venue together, and we had a really good opportunity to chat and connect. We talked about faith. We talked about recovery. We talked about doing comedy with a purpose, and we had a real good connection. So about a week before I was doing comedy for my first time ever, I got to meet the guy that planted the seed that it could be done, which that was just really special. And since then, I've become part of the Christian Comedy Association, and I went to my first conference this past year and bumped into Michael Jr. again down there. We were able to break off, and we had the lunch together, me, him, and about 3 other comedians, and really started to get to know each other. So he's now, what I would consider a friend. I mean, we're not hanging out and having coffee every 2 weeks, but anytime our paths cross, we're happy to see each other. So that's cool. And then there's another person that this is even more amazing as to how this person came into my life. When I decided I was going to do comedy, I put a little 5-minute bit together and I performed it for my wife. And in as nice a way possible, she said, it's not very good. But it needs to be more like comedy. and I'm so glad she gave me that honest feedback, because then what I did is I started researching how to do comedy. I nerded out completely. I got books. I started listening to podcasts. I started watching specials with a stopwatch and a yellow pad and really analyzing it and breaking it down. Well, one of the key podcasts that I was listening to is called School of Laughs, and it's the Rick Roberts School of Laughs. And Rick Roberts is a touring professional comedian for many decades, and he's dedicated himself to teaching people how to do comedy. And that's actually for comedians and also for public speakers. Say that again?
I said, is he the brother to Oral?
Yeah. No.
No.
At least I never brought it up.
Sorry. I thought for about 30 seconds, do I say it? Yeah. Just say it.
Do I say it? Do I say it? Yes. Yeah. Well, so Rick does this podcast, and I'm coming up on the day of my first ever show doing comedy, and I've got some nerves and I'm thinking ahead, and this is just a really big deal for me. Well, I walk into the venue and a guy walks up to me wearing a name tag that says Rick Roberts. Which is nice because I wouldn't have recognized him by face. I had just been listening to his podcasts, and I said, are you Rick Roberts?
The Rick Roberts?
Yeah. And he said, yeah. I said, you don't know this, but you've been teaching me how to do comedy. I think he said something witty like, I hope you do well.
Yeah, I'll pray for you.
Yeah, right. But we ended up sitting together during the show, and he gave me a couple of just, nerve calming pointers before I took the stage. And then after I took the stage, he gave me a real positive critique, and that kicked off a relationship. And he is the guy that's taught me more about comedy than anybody else. Actually, about a year after that first time I did comedy, he had me on his podcast, the Rick Roberts School of Laughs, as a guest, and that was a huge honor. He just recently hit his 200th episode, and for his 200th episode, he recapped everybody that he's talked to. And as I'm listening to that list, I'm like, wow, how am I included in that list
Oh, cool.
a year into doing comedy, and many of the people on this list are household names, and it just was a moment to reflect on
That's
how
a good
blessed.
giant's shoulders to stand on.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So as you are creating your content and you have a purpose, I mean, share with us, your purpose obviously is to be authentic to who you are. So you put it out there, the unemployed alcoholic, but where do you draw the line? Like how personal, how private, and where do you draw the line as to how appropriate your content is when you're dealing with talking with people about mental health and all of that?
Well, I do have a bit that I do about suicide. And I'll share that story that I shared earlier about passive suicidal ideation. And then I actually will go into some jokes about suicide. They're not jokes about people committing suicide.
Right.
They're not jokes at the subject.
Share a little bit about what that kind of joke looks like.
Okay, you want me to tell some suicide jokes? All right. Well, one of those, is it wrong for a suicide prevention counselor to require prepayment?
Okay.
Well, anyway, maybe we should cut that.
Yeah, we might have needed a setup.
Am I wrong to consider suicide a once in a lifetime opportunity?
Oh.
Yeah. But I've been able to share that. See, I learned that by talking openly about suicide, if somebody is at risk, that can actually help break the stigma.
It's a bridge.
Yeah, it's something to take the shame away, and maybe they'll talk to somebody about it. Yeah. So some of that content or some of that material can be jarring and even triggering for people, but it also could save somebody's life. There was one time that I did that material, which very often it does very well. The room will respond positively when I get into that material. But after I did a set and included my suicide material, 3 different people came up to me and shared with me their stories. To me, that makes it worthwhile. That makes it worth doing.
Yep.
So to come back to your question, where do I draw the line? I don't know if I draw it. I'll talk about anything if I feel like it can help attack stigma around things and help anybody in the audience.
How much is being talked about now? When we think of those who have succumbed to suicide that are prominent and comedians and even will share now public that they struggle with depression. How much material is out there now talking about this and acknowledging it?
Well, there's a lot. We've come a long way as far as, as a society being able to talk about these things, which is good because the trends are disturbing as far as what's happening with that.
Do you think Robin Williams' death was the catalyst to that, or do you think it started before that?
I think it started before that. The loss of Robin Williams is tragic, but the loss of about 50,000 people a year is tragic. Yeah, I think just like anything, we can't oversimplify the story arc and have everything was bad, then this happened, and now everything's trending good.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things influencing.
Yeah, let me clarify my question. I was thinking, as far as it being addressed on stage in a comedic format, do you think that Robin Williams almost opened the door for people to, it like demanded to be talked about because it was like right in your face? I'm a comedian and we deal with this day in and day out, and just gives the liberty for you to address it.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a turning point or not. I do know that within the community of comedians, and whether that be Christian comedians or blue comedians or any type of comedians, there is an overlap between mental health struggles and comedy. You've got to be a little bit warped to be real enough to get on stage and do comedy, and at the same time laugh, some of the uncomfortable things. There is an overlap there. So, and also comedy is this wonderful communication technique, this wonderful way of connecting with each other that kind of allows us to step into uncomfortable areas.
Right.
So I think it's a natural overlap for comedy to get into some of these areas that are uncomfortable for people to talk about, but need to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Laugh Fest earlier, and this Laugh Fest recovery showcase that we did last year for the first time, and then this year we're going to have that happening again. That really, to me, is kind of a benchmark event on what it's all about, because it's not just for the recovery community; it's for everybody. But all the comics involved have a recovery story, and it really does a lot to attack stigma for everybody to come together and laugh with people who have experienced recovery. So that's a super special event to me, and probably a benchmark thing is what this is all about, what the unemployed alcoholic is all about.
Yeah. Now, how has it affected your life now in your personal? How do you maintain your now career choice, but also continue to stay in that positive mental health place and continue to heal and move forward in your own walk?
A good friend of mine, Luke Morgan, Pastor Luke Morgan, he just accepted a call up at a church in Traverse City. But one day he and I were at lunch, and he looked at me as I was kind of sharing, and he said, "I pray that you never lose your brokenness." You know, and I thought, man, what a powerful statement. Wow, that's incredible. So that's a thing. Like, I mean, if you look at my logo, the Unemployed Alcoholic, it's a smiley face with a blindfold that says Unemployed Alcoholic.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a little reminder to not let circumstances blind me to the joy and laughter that's all around. But there's a flip side to that. You know, don't ever get so far away from your struggles that they no longer exist. You know, we need a brokenness to be able to experience life the way it's intended and thrive through it.
I think that is so powerful, Aaron. There is a fine line between living in your brokenness and giving your brokenness a credibility in your life that is not just defined, it hasn't defined you, but it has refined you, and being able to know that we're still broken outside of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that was the one thing that he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, those who are bankrupt, those who are broken, for there shall be the kingdom of God. So I love that you said that, because that's an oxymoron, isn't it? We try to bandage it up and cover it up and mask it over and all of those facades and pretenses, and yet don't ever forget your brokenness. I love it.
Yeah. For some of us, it's just a little easier to remember how broken we are.
Yeah. You know, there's so much in this, and I just appreciate that we got to spend another episode talking about this. I want to just remind our listeners and viewers that we are a listener-supported episode. Season 2 is only made possible by those who give. And so if you love what you're hearing, and if it is encouraging you, equipping and strengthening you to laugh your past off, please hop over to livewithtricia.com/partner, because there are so many levels that you can give and receive incentives accordingly. And so I would greatly appreciate you visiting us over there. You can listen to us on podcast and webcast across all platforms. So please consider becoming a cheerful giver at any level. Help us spread the laughter. Today's episode, by the way, is underwritten by Noble Pearls Media, where inspirational creatives influence culture by representing leaders in media, ministry, and the marketplace. For your film, modeling, voiceover, and keynote speaker or career coach needs, please contact me at Tricia Harmon at noblepearlsmedia.com. And again, we have some resources. We'll make sure that we put Aaron's schedule out there and anything else that is going to support you along the way, the links to the Celebrate Recovery, as well as Laugh Fest, so that you can know where to catch him at the events. And also make sure that you are subscribing to Aaron's channels and mine as well, so that you can get those notifications. We are just kind of about wrapping this up. So Aaron, what would you say to the person who is struggling? And yes, we're recording this. Everybody sees your beautiful tree. We are recording this during the Christmas season, but it doesn't matter. Any family gathering, there are family and friends, loved ones who probably need to be approached, addressed in a loving, non-judgmental way. And that's one of your main focuses in what you do and how you talk with people. What can you say to us so that we don't say something stupid like, well, you just need to bind that in Jesus' name and throw it in hell?
I developed a tool called Real Support, and I know you mentioned that your book is an acrostic, or a word that means something else, and Celebrate Recovery is all about acrostics. So I figured I needed to develop my own acrostic, and I developed this acrostic called Real Support. And where it came from is exactly what you're getting at. What was it that people around me did that helped me seek meaningful life change and actually achieve some sobriety and things like that? Because we all love the people around us and we want to help them. Our tendency is to try to control them, but that's not very effective.
Them, because they're on,
or reject them. Yeah. So this tool, Real Support, the thing that I try to do when I'm trying to support other people, and the thing that's been effective when other people have been supporting me, is to do real support. And that's R is relate to people's challenges. Don't judge them or their circumstances. Encourage their efforts. Don't condemn their shortcomings or failures. Ask them questions instead of telling them what to do. It's our tendency to jump in and say, you need to do this, you need to do that. But if we can even frame that in a question of, what would happen if you did this? To not try to control them. And then the final one is L, let go. We talked a little bit about codependency. I think that was the last episode. But ultimately, we can't let our own sense of self-worth and value be determined by someone else's choices and actions. So we have to let go. We can't control people. The serenity prayer is so powerful, which is a big thing in recovery. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The thing that I've learned is other people's behavior always falls squarely into the bucket of things that I cannot control. Of course, if us as Christians, we get bonus L, we can let God and we can pray for people. We can fall back on his example of how to support people. We can drop on his strength and wisdom.
That's awesome. I want to make sure we give that is that something that you have as a resource that we can give as a download or purchase?
Oh, I would never sell that. That's free for anybody that wants to have it. It's on the homepage of my website. And then also there's a more detailed blog post that's in the stories section of my website. We can send you a direct link to that.
Awesome. And your website is?
It is theunemployedalcoholic.com.
There you go. So we'll make sure that we direct people over there. That is huge. I love that. Sometimes keeping it super simple is the best place to start, so thank you for that. Aaron, this flew by. I can't believe we're done. But, we get to see each other more often because we live in the same town. So I'm looking forward to seeing you at Laugh Fest. I want to encourage our listeners and viewers to also check out the tickets. And it is a free event at Laugh Fest. So make sure that you're looking for that as well. Look up Aaron Sorrells on all of the unemployed alcoholic handle and on all of his social media platforms. Thank you, Aaron. This is really great.
Thank you, Tricia. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and all the best to you and what you're doing here with Live with Tricia. And of course, your wonderful audience and supporters.
Well, thank you. Alrighty. Well, guys, have an awesome week. Make sure you are staying notified for the next episode. We have an incredible lineup of more comedians coming your way to help you laugh your past off. Lord bless you. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
Wasn't that a great episode of Live with Trisha? Be sure now to follow, share, and please leave a comment on our social media platforms using the handle Live with Trisha. You can make more seasons and episodes possible. Become a cheerful giver. Experience the joy of giving back at any level by linking to livewithtrisha.com/partners. Let us know how this is impacting you in your daily walk. Have a question or suggestion? Drop us a line. info@livewithtrisha.com. Join us next week for another amazing episode of Live with Trisha, where together we learn to laugh our past off. Because after all, laughter truly is the best medicine. So go ahead and over-medicate yourself with it today. I'm Misty Jordan. God bless.